Welcome back to the Baby Criminologists, the only podcast where the host can't read yet, but somehow knows more about forensic flaws than half the courtroom. Today, we're diving into the glittery, glorified mess of forensic science, or as it's portrayed on TV, CSI. I just solved that murder in 22 minutes. You know the drill. A detective strolls into a crime lab, throws a handful of evidence on a high-tech machine, presses one button, and boom. Case solved in less time than it takes to warm my bottle for my midday snack. DNA match, fingerprint match, confession obtained. Justice is swift, neat, and totally scientific. Except, and here's the twist you won't see on TV, real forensic science is nothing like that. In reality, forensic science is often messier than the backseat of a minivan during snack time. It's inconsistent, poorly regulated, and frequently built on foundations shakier than my first steps. Here's why. When you're talking about fields like medicine, chemistry, or biology, scientists need to prove their methods are reliable. They run countless tests, publish peer-reviewed studies, establish error rates, and replicate results across different labs before anything gets considered valid. That's how you keep millions of patients safe and drugs effective. But forensic science? The bar is much lower. Courts don't demand airtight scientific proof. Instead, forensic evidence only has to be generally accepted in the field, or persuasive enough to convince a judge. So you might have forensic methods that have never been rigorously tested, error rates that are unknown, and analysts who vary wildly in their conclusions, as long as the judge is convinced. This is a sentiment highlighted by a 2009 report by the National Research Council that stated the forensic science system is badly fragmented, has no mandatory certification or accreditation, and lacks the rigorous research needed to establish the scientific basis and reliability of many forensic methods. In other words, forensic science is kind of like when I recently discovered shadows. Scary, confusing, and convinced it's some kind of monster. A recent report in 2024 by the National Criminal Justice Association echoes the concern of a lack of national standards on that guides forensic science practices. You know, those boring but important rules that tell you when something is actually real and not just a guess with a microscope. In many forensic fields like tool mark analysis, bite marks, shoe prints, even handwriting, there is no agreed-upon standards for what counts as a match. There's no universal checklist, no minimum threshold of similarity, no standardized scoring system, just vibes and a magnifying glass. Imagine if pediatricians worked like this. Doctor: this rash looks like measles. Parent: how do you know? Doctor: because it reminds me of that one rash I saw during snack time in 2012. That doctor would be removed from the building with a timeout and a lawsuit. But in forensics, that's admissible testimony. So when a forensic examiner testifies, it's often based on their own experience, their lab's practices, or what their instructor told them once in 1997, not a validated national standard. That's not science. That's improv with a lab coat. But what can be the consequences of this lack of validity or standards in forensic sciences? Why should we really care? Brandon Mayfield, convicted in 2004 on terrorism charges after the Madrid bombings. FBI analysts claimed a partial fingerprint match pushed them to arrest him. But guess what? The fingerprint expert testified with 100% confidence, despite the print being partial and from a low-quality image. No error rates, no peer-reviewed validation, just a confident pronouncement in a courtroom. That fingerprint was later conclusively matched to a known Spanish national, a complete misidentification. Mayfield spent 2 weeks in prison, lost his job, and almost lost everything else due to what turned out to be bad fingerprinting viewed through the lens of courtroom pressure. Next, let me introduce you to Eddie Lee Howard, convicted in 1994 for the murder of Georgia Kemp in Mississippi. But here's the twist. The conviction rested almost entirely on bite mark analysis. That's where a forensic dentist looks at a bruise and says, yep, that's his mouth. No DNA, no blood, no eyewitness. Just a denture match by eye, which, as you can guess, is basically astrology with molars. In 2021, the Mississippi Supreme Court vacates his conviction based on errors in bite mark comparison and DNA evidence not matching him. We trust forensic scientists in court more than we trust actual scientists in a lab. And that's backwards. Because when you go to a hospital, you get a drug that's been through years of testing. When you go to court, You might get convicted by a bite mark or a partial fingerprint someone feels good about. If forensic science doesn't adopt rigorous validation, mandatory accreditation, blind labs, error rate transparency, it'll keep wrecking lives. People's freedom isn't a prop in a TV show, it's everything. Drop a comment below and tell us, which piece of courtroom science makes you cry harder than teething at midnight? And don't forget to subscribe, because nothing says, I crave accountability in science, like following a podcast hosted by a baby still watching for that shadow monster. That's it for today. I'd drop the mic, but it's a choking hazard. And unlike some evidence, I follow protocols.